The harsh crack of a whip split the morning air as Abigail Zimmerman stumbled forward, her hands tied with rough rope that bit into her wrists. She'd been sold by her own husband, traded for 3 crates of whiskey to settle a gambling debt, and now found herself being paraded through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, New Mexico Territory like livestock, in the summer of 1878. "Keep moving," growled Silas Jenkins, the saloon owner who now claimed ownership of her. His breath reeked of stale liquor as he shoved her forward. "You'll fetch a fine price from one of the miners. Maybe I'll keep you for myself." Abigail refused to cry. At 26, she'd already endured 5 years of marriage to Thomas Zimmerman, a man whose charm had dissolved into cruelty shortly after their wedding. But even she couldn't have imagined he would stoop so low as to trade her away like property. The townsfolk averted their eyes as she passed. Many knew her from the dressmaking shop where she worked, but none dared intervene. In Silver Creek, a man's right to his property, even when that property was human, remained largely unchallenged. "Stop right there, Jenkins." The voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife. Abigail lifted her gaze from the dirt to see a tall figure blocking their path. The morning sun silhouetted him, casting his face in shadow beneath a well-worn Stetson. "This ain't your business, Wyatt," Jenkins spat, tightening his grip on the rope. "I'm making it my business." Wyatt Xavier stepped forward, and Abigail could now make out his features. Weathered by sun and wind, his face bore a quiet dignity. His eyes, blue as a summer sky, fixed on Jenkins with determined calm. "How much? How much what? How much for the lady?" Jenkins laughed, a harsh sound that made Abigail's skin crawl. "She ain't for sale to you, got plans for this one." Wyatt's hand moved to rest casually on his holstered revolver. "Name your price, Jenkins." The saloon keeper's eyes narrowed, calculating. $500. Several onlookers gasped. It was an outrageous sum, enough to buy a decent plot of land. Without hesitation, Wyatt reached into his vest and pulled out a leather pouch. "300 in gold dust, plus my Appaloosa. That mare's worth more than 200 to any man with sense." Jenkins licked his lips, considering. The Appaloosa was indeed a fine horse, and gold dust didn't lie. "Deal," he said finally, reaching for the pouch. Wyatt held it back. "Cut her loose first." When Jenkins sliced through her bonds, Abigail rubbed her raw wrists, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. She felt nothing but humiliation. "Come on," Wyatt said softly, not touching her. "My wagon's just down the street." Abigail followed him, acutely aware of the whispers trailing behind them. She didn't know this man had seen him around town occasionally but never spoken to him. Why would he spend such a sum on a stranger? His wagon was simple but well-maintained. A painted sign on its side read, "Xavier Trading Company." He helped her up to the seat without presuming to touch her beyond what was necessary. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Wherever you want to go," he replied, climbing up beside her. "But I suggest we leave town first. I've got a small ranch about 10 miles north. You can rest there, decide what you want to do next." "Why?" The question escaped her before she could stop it. Wyatt glanced at her, then focused on guiding the horses out of town. "No man has the right to sell another human being, not in this century, not ever." They traveled in silence for nearly an hour, the wagon wheels creaking against the rutted dirt road. Abigail stared at the passing landscape, scrubby desert giving way to low hills dotted with piñon pines. Her mind raced with uncertainty. What would happen to her now? What did this stranger truly want? "I don't expect anything from you," Wyatt said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "When we reach my place, you can have the guest room. There's a lock on the door. Use it if it makes you feel safer." The sincerity in his voice made her look at him properly for the first time. His profile was strong, straight nose, firm jaw with a day's growth of beard. His hands holding the reins were calloused from hard work. "My husband," she began, "is no longer your concern," Wyatt finished. "What he did was illegal, though the law's seldom enforced in these parts. But know this, if Thomas Zimmerman tries to claim you back, he'll answer to me." The ranch was modest, a sturdy log cabin with a barn and corral nearby. A small garden plot showed signs of careful tending, and chickens scratched in the yard. It wasn't grand, but it was neat and well kept. "It's not much," Wyatt said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it's peaceful." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room. Handmade furniture, polished with use, was arranged with an eye for practicality rather than fashion. Bookshelves lined one wall, unusual for a frontier home. "You read," Abigail observed, surprised. A hint of a smile touched Wyatt's lips. "When there's time." He showed her to a small but clean bedroom. "Rest if you like. There's water in the pitcher. I'll prepare something to eat." Left alone, Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed. For the first time since that morning, when Thomas had handed her over to Jenkins with cold eyes and a dismissive shrug, she allowed herself to cry. Silent tears streamed down her face as she grappled with her new reality. She had no family to return to. Her parents had died of fever 2 years earlier, and her only brother had headed to California during the gold rush and never returned. Thomas had been her security, flawed though it was. Now she was dependent on the kindness of a stranger whose motives she couldn't fully trust. When she emerged from the bedroom, having washed her face and composed herself, Wyatt was setting a simple meal on the table. "It's just beans and cornbread," he apologized. "I wasn't expecting company." "It's more than enough," she replied, sitting across from him. "Mr. Xavier, Wyatt, please." Wyatt. The name felt strange on her tongue. "I can't stay here. I appreciate what you did, but Mrs. Zimmerman, Abigail," she corrected automatically. He nodded. "Abigail, I'm not asking you to stay permanently, just until you decide what you want." "There's work if you want it. The garden needs tending, and I'm no hand with a needle for mending. I'll pay fair wages." "Why are you helping me?" The question had been burning inside her since he'd intervened in town. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, methodically buttering a piece of cornbread. "I had a sister," he said finally. "Her husband sold her to a man heading to California. I was away working cattle drives. By the time I returned and learned what happened, the trail was cold." His eyes, when he raised them to meet hers, held old pain. "I couldn't help her, but I could help you." The simple honesty of his explanation silenced any further questions. They ate without speaking much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. After dinner, Wyatt showed her around the property. The barn housed 2 milk cows, several chickens, and a sturdy workhorse. "My Appaloosa was the best horse I ever owned," he admitted, "but she was just a horse." "You shouldn't have paid so much," Abigail said. "I'm not worth." "Don't." His voice was sharp enough to make her start. "Don't ever say that. No human being should be bought or sold." "I didn't pay for you, I paid to free you." In the days that followed, they established a careful routine. Abigail took over the cooking and household tasks, finding comfort in the familiar work. Wyatt tended the livestock and made repairs around the property. They spoke little beyond the necessities, but the silence between them gradually became companionable rather than awkward. A week into her stay, Wyatt returned from checking fence lines to find Abigail in the garden, harvesting early vegetables. The sun caught in her dark blonde hair, tied back with a faded ribbon. She'd fashioned one of his old shirts into a more fitting garment for herself, cinched at the waist with twine. Something about the sight of her there, so naturally a part of his homestead, made him pause. She looked up, sensing his presence. "The carrots are coming in well," she said, holding up several slender orange roots, "and there's plenty of beans for dinner." "You've brought the garden back to life," he observed. "I've never had much luck with growing things. It just needs a woman's touch." The words hung between them, suddenly awkward. Abigail busied herself with the vegetables, avoiding his eyes. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson, Abigail broke their comfortable silence. "I should leave soon," she said. "I can't impose on your kindness forever." Wyatt's hands stilled on the bridle he was mending. "Where would you go?" "Santa Fe, perhaps. I could find work as a seamstress, or Albuquerque. I hear it's growing fast." "You're not imposing," he said quietly, "and Silver Creek is still too close." If Thomas learns you're working in Santa Fe, the mention of her husband's name made her shoulders tense. He won't come looking. He got what he wanted: liquor and freedom from a wife he never truly wanted. Men like Thomas Zimmerman don't like losing what they consider theirs, even if they've thrown it away themselves. Wyatt set aside the bridle. "Stay through the summer at least, build up some savings. I'll pay you fair wages for your work here." Abigail studied his profile in the fading light. "Why are you being so kind to me? Is kindness such a rare thing that it needs explanation?" "In my experience, yes." Wyatt's laugh held no humor. "Then you've known the wrong kind of people." The next morning, as Abigail was hanging laundry on the line stretched between two pines, she noticed a cloud of dust on the horizon. Visitors were rare at the Xavier ranch. She hurried inside to warn Wyatt, who was at his desk reviewing accounts. "Someone's coming," she said, her voice tight with anxiety. Wyatt moved to the window, his expression darkening. "Two riders." He reached for the rifle mounted above the door. "Go to your room, lock the door, don't come out until I call you." Abigail did as she was told, heart pounding. Through the small window in her room, she could see two men dismounting in the yard. One was Thomas. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Wyatt standing on the porch, rifle casually held across his body. Thomas gesticulated angrily, jabbing a finger toward the cabin. The other man, she recognized him as Leonard Reeves. The town deputy stood slightly apart, looking uncomfortable. The discussion grew heated. Thomas tried to push past Wyatt, who smoothly raised the rifle to bar his way. Deputy Reeves stepped forward, saying something that seemed to calm both men. After several tense minutes, Thomas spat on the ground, mounted his horse, and rode away. The deputy lingered, exchanging a few more words with Wyatt before following. When Wyatt called her name, Abigail emerged cautiously. "What happened?" she asked, though she could guess. "Your husband claims I stole his property." Wyatt's voice was controlled, but anger simmered beneath the surface. "Says Jenkins had no right to sell you since Thomas only loaned you as collateral." Abigail felt ill, and the deputy, Reeves, is a decent sort. "Says that while the law might be murky, selling a wife is against public decency, and he won't enforce Thomas's claim. But he warned me your husband is drinking heavily and making threats." "This is what I feared," Abigail whispered. "I've brought trouble to your door." The trouble was already here. Wyatt placed the rifle back on its hooks. "Thomas Zimmerman has been a menace to this territory for years. This just gives me a more personal reason to stand against him." That night, Abigail couldn't sleep. Every sound made her start the wind in the pines, the distant howl of a coyote, the settling of the cabin's timbers. Around midnight, she gave up and wrapped a shawl around her nightdress, padding quietly to the kitchen for some water. She found Wyatt still awake, sitting at the table with a single lamp burning low. A half-empty cup of coffee sat before him, long gone cold. "You should be sleeping," he said without looking up. "So should you." She poured herself water from the pitcher. "Are you expecting trouble tonight?" "No." "Thomas is all bluster until he's cornered. He'll be drinking himself into a stupor at the saloon." Wyatt finally raised his eyes to hers. "But I couldn't rest knowing you were afraid." Something in his gaze made her breath catch. In the lamplight, his features seemed softer, the usual reserve in his expression replaced by something warmer. "I'm not afraid," she said. "Not when I'm here." The weeks that followed brought changes to their relationship. The careful distance Wyatt had maintained began to dissolve. Their conversations over meals grew longer, more personal. He told her about his years as a cavalry scout during the last Indian Wars, his brief attempt at prospecting, and finally his decision to settle on this quiet patch of land. She shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, her journey west with her family, and her dreams of someday opening her own dressmaking shop. Wyatt began bringing her small gifts from his occasional trips to town: ribbon for her hair, a packet of flower seeds, a book of poetry. Abigail found herself watching for his return, her heart quickening at the sound of hoofbeats in the yard. One evening in late July, they sat together on a blanket spread beneath the stars. The night was warm, the air fragrant with sage and piñon. Abigail had prepared a special supper to celebrate a good price Wyatt had received for his wool clip. "I've been thinking," Wyatt said, leaning back on his elbows to gaze at the sky, "about what happens when summer ends." Abigail's hands stilled in the act of repacking the picnic basket. "You want me to leave?" "No." His voice was soft but certain. "I want you to stay, permanently." She looked at him, searching his face in the starlight. "As your housekeeper," Wyatt sat up, reaching slowly for her hand. "As my wife, if you'll have me." The proposal hung in the air between them, unexpected yet somehow inevitable. "I'm still married," she whispered, "in name only. There are laws about abandonment, and what Thomas did selling you that would be grounds for divorce in any civilized court." His fingers tightened around hers. "I know it's soon. I know you might not feel for me what I've come to feel for you, but I want you to know that option exists." Abigail's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. She'd grown fond of Wyatt more than fond, if she were honest with herself. His quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, his respect for her as a person rather than a possession all had worked their way into her heart. But marriage, after her disastrous first attempt, "I need time," she said finally. "Of course." He released her hand. "There's no hurry." But fate had other plans. 3 days later, as Abigail was returning from gathering eggs, she heard the pounding of hooves. Thinking it was Wyatt returning from checking the western pasture, she stepped around the cabin with a smile that quickly died. Thomas Zimmerman sat astride a lathered horse, his face flushed with drink and rage. Behind him rode 4 men she didn't recognize, rough-looking characters with the hard eyes of men who did violence for pay. "There's my runaway wife," Thomas slurred, dismounting unsteadily. "Told you boys she was a pretty piece." Abigail backed toward the cabin door. "Leave, Thomas, you have no claim on me anymore." "That's where you're wrong, darling." He staggered forward. "A man can't sell what's lawfully his wife. That traitor cheated me, and you," his face darkened, "you've been playing house with him ever since." "Where is Xavier?" one of the other men asked, scanning the property. "Checking fences," Abigail said, her mouth dry with fear. "He'll be back any minute," Thomas laughed. "Convenient." "Plenty of time for us to be gone." He lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "You're coming home, wife. After my friends have their turn, maybe you'll remember your place." Abigail's scream was cut short as Thomas clamped a hand over her mouth. She kicked and thrashed, but his grip was iron. The crack of a rifle shot froze everyone in place. "Let her go, Zimmerman." Wyatt's voice was deadly calm. He stood at the edge of the yard, rifle aimed steadily at Thomas's chest. "I won't ask twice." Thomas shoved Abigail away so hard she fell to the ground. "This is between a man and his wife. The law's on my side. 4 hired guns against 1 woman don't seem much like the law to me." Wyatt didn't move, his aim unwavering. "Mount up and ride out, all of you, now." The hired men exchanged glances, clearly calculating their odds. "He can't shoot us all," one muttered. "I'll shoot Zimmerman first," Wyatt replied, having heard him. "The rest of you can decide if he's worth dying for." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then one of the men slowly backed his horse away. "This ain't worth $5, Zimmerman. You said it was just a domestic matter." Another rider nodded. "I didn't sign on for murder." Thomas's face contorted with fury. "Cowards, fine, I'll handle this myself." His hand dropped to his sidearm. Wyatt's rifle cracked again, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from Thomas's boot. "Next one won't miss." "You can't keep her," Thomas snarled, but he'd lost his nerve. "The law," Deputy Reeves already made his position clear. Wyatt cut him off. "And if you try this again, I'll ride to Santa Fe myself to speak to the territorial judge. I hear he takes a dim view of men who trade their wives for whiskey." The mention of the judge seemed to puncture Thomas's bravado. With a final venomous glare at Abigail, he mounted his horse. "She's not worth the trouble anyway," he spat, wheeling his mount around. Frigid bitch never was much use. After they'd disappeared in a cloud of dust, Wyatt rushed to Abigail's side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, trembling with reaction. "You came back just in time." "I never left," he admitted, helping her to her feet. "I had a feeling Thomas might try something. I've been watching the road from the ridge." That night, Abigail couldn't bear to be alone. Wyatt made a pallet for himself on the floor of the main room while she took the sofa nearby. Neither slept much, both listening for sounds of return. "I need to leave," Abigail said into the darkness. "As long as I'm here, you're in danger." "Running won't solve it," Wyatt replied. "Thomas will only follow. We need to face this head-on." "How?" "There's a circuit judge due in Silver Creek next week. We'll petition him for a divorce on grounds of cruelty and abandonment. I've already sent word to a lawyer in Santa Fe." Abigail sat up, staring at his shadowy form. "You've been planning this?" "I've been hoping," he corrected. "Hoping you'd want to be free of Thomas legally, not just in practice." hoping you might consider my proposal after that, but I would have helped you secure the divorce regardless." 2 days later, they rode into Silver Creek together. Abigail held her head high, though she could feel the stares and whispers of the townspeople. They went directly to the office of Howard Fletcher, the lawyer who had agreed to represent her. Fletcher was a thin, scholarly-looking man with spectacles and a surprisingly kind smile. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he greeted her, "I've reviewed your case. While selling a wife isn't specifically addressed in territorial statutes, abandonment certainly is. And I've taken statements from witnesses who saw your husband trade you to Jenkins." "Will that be enough?" Abigail asked anxiously. "With Judge Harmon, I believe so. He's a progressive sort, not bound by the more archaic views of marriage that still persist in some courts." Fletcher shuffled some papers. "However, we should be prepared for your husband to contest the divorce." "He will," Wyatt said grimly. "He's a prideful man. Losing his claim on Abigail would be a public humiliation he won't accept easily." Fletcher nodded. "Then we must be prepared. Mrs. Zimmerman, I need you to write down every instance of cruelty or mistreatment you experienced during your marriage. Leave nothing out, no matter how personal or painful." The next few days were among the most difficult of Abigail's life. Reliving the years with Thomas, his verbal abuse, his rough handling, the nights he'd forced himself on her, the times he'd spent their food money on liquor left her emotionally drained. Wyatt gave her space but remained a steady presence, his quiet support never wavering. When Judge Harmon arrived, the town courthouse was packed. Divorce hearings were uncommon entertainment in Silver Creek, especially ones involving such scandalous circumstances. Abigail sat beside Fletcher, trying to ignore the curious stares. Wyatt sat directly behind her, close enough that she could feel his reassuring presence. Thomas arrived with his own lawyer, a slick-looking man from Albuquerque named Denton. Thomas had made an effort with his appearance, dressed in his Sunday best, hair slicked down and for once completely sober. Judge Harmon, a white bearded man with penetrating eyes, called the court to order. He listened impassively as Fletcher outlined Abigail's case, presenting witness statements from townspeople who had seen Thomas hand her over to Jenkins, as well as Abigail's own testimony about years of mistreatment. When it was Denton's turn, he painted Thomas as a devoted husband who had fallen on hard times. "My client admits to a terrible error in judgment, Your Honor. In a moment of desperation, influenced by alcohol, he made an arrangement he deeply regrets. But he never intended to permanently part with his beloved wife." Thomas nodded solemnly, playing the penitent husband to perfection. "Mrs. Zimmerman has been living in sin with another man," Denton continued, gesturing toward Wyatt. "If anyone has abandoned their marriage vows, it is she." Abigail felt her face flame with humiliation. She hadn't expected Thomas to fight so hard to keep her not out of love, certainly, but out of pride and possessiveness. Judge Harmon's questions were incisive, cutting through the lawyer's rhetoric. He questioned Abigail directly about her marriage, her treatment at Thomas's hands, and the circumstances of her time with Wyatt Xavier. Though his manner was clinical, she sensed compassion behind his formal demeanor. "Mr. Xavier," the judge said finally, "please approach the bench." Wyatt stepped forward, hat in hand, his posture respectful but unintimidated. "You purchased Mrs. Zimmerman from Silas Jenkins. Is that correct?" "I paid to release her, Your Honor. I never considered her my property. Yet she has been living under your roof for nearly 2 months." "In a separate room with a locked door between us," Wyatt replied steadily. "I offered her sanctuary, not dishonor." The judge studied him thoughtfully. "What is your interest in these proceedings, Mr. Xavier?" Wyatt glanced at Abigail before answering. "I hope to marry Mrs. Zimmerman, should she be granted her freedom and should she accept my proposal. But regardless of her decision about me, she deserves to be free of a man who treated her as property." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Judge Harmon rapped his gavel for silence. "I've heard enough," he announced. "This court will recess for 1 hour while I consider my judgment." That hour was the longest of Abigail's life. She sat on a bench outside the courthouse, Wyatt beside her, neither speaking. Thomas paced nearby, shooting them venomous glances. When court resumed, Judge Harmon didn't waste time. Having considered the evidence and testimony presented, I find that Thomas Zimmerman's actions constituted extreme cruelty and de facto abandonment. The marriage is hereby dissolved. Abigail felt a wave of dizzying relief wash over her. Free. She was free. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mr. Zimmerman, let me be clear that any attempt to harass or reclaim Miss Zimmerman will be met with the full force of territorial law. Do I make myself understood? Thomas's face was a mask of rage, but he nodded stiffly. Outside the courthouse, Abigail finally let the tears come, tears of relief, of joy, of an overwhelming sense of possibility that had been absent from her life for so long. Wyatt stood beside her, solid as always, offering a handkerchief without comment. It's really over, she whispered. A new beginning, he corrected gently. They returned to the ranch that evening in a wagon borrowed from Fletcher. The familiar landscape welcomed them, the scrubby desert giving way to pinyon-covered hills, the rustic cabin nestled among the pines. After tending to the horses, Wyatt found Abigail standing on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in fiery hues. What happens now? She asked without turning. Wyatt moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. That's entirely up to you. You're a free woman, Abigail. If you want to go to Santa Fe or Albuquerque, I'll see you safely there. If you want to stay as my housekeeper, that arrangement can continue. If you want, he hesitated, if you would consider my proposal, nothing would make me happier. But there's no rush for any decision. Abigail turned to face him, studying the face that had become so dear to her, the strong jaw, the kind eyes, the mouth that smiled so rarely but so warmly when it did. I never thought I'd want to marry again, she said softly. Marriage has meant captivity to me, but with you, it feels like freedom, hope flared in Wyatt's eyes. Is that a yes? Instead of answering, Abigail closed the distance between them. Rising on tiptoe, she pressed her lips to her first truly willing kiss in years. His arms encircled her gently, as if she were made of porcelain, but when she deepened the kiss, his embrace tightened, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest. When they finally parted, both breathless, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. I'll take that as a maybe, he murmured, and they both laughed, the sound carrying across the twilight landscape like a promise. They were married 2 weeks later by the same Judge Harmon, in a small ceremony attended by a few of Wyatt's friends and business associates. Abigail wore a new dress of pale blue calico with wildflowers in her hair. Wyatt had never looked more handsome, cleaned up in a new shirt and vest, his usual reserve softened by happiness. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other fully for the first time. Where Thomas had been rough and demanding, Wyatt was gentle and considerate, teaching Abigail that physical love could be tender and mutually joyful rather than something to be endured. As they lay together afterward, Abigail traced the scar on Wyatt's shoulder, a souvenir from his cavalry days. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his fingers playing with her hair spread across the pillow like spun gold. "That I never knew it could be like this," she replied honestly. "That happiness was possible again." Wyatt kissed her forehead. "This is just the beginning." Over the following years, they built a life together that surpassed Abigail's wildest hopes. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Wyatt's quiet strength complemented Abigail's practical efficiency, and together they transformed the modest homestead into one of the most successful small ranches in the territory. 2 years after their marriage, Abigail gave birth to a son they named James, after Wyatt's father. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 18 months later. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Wyatt adding rooms and Abigail filling them with the warmth of home. They heard that Thomas Zimmerman had left New Mexico Territory, heading for the silver mines of Colorado after gambling away his remaining possessions. Silas Jenkins sold his saloon and moved to California. Silver Creek gradually shed its rougher elements as families and legitimate businesses replaced the saloons and gambling halls. On their 5th anniversary, Wyatt surprised Abigail with the deed to a small storefront in the growing town of Albuquerque. "For your dressmaking shop," he explained as she stared at the document in disbelief. You never stopped dreaming of it, now it can be real. With tears in her eyes, Abigail threw her arms around him. How did you manage this? Been saving, and that last will contract paid better than expected. He kissed her softly. You gave up your independence for me, I wanted to give some of it back to you. I never gave up my independence, she corrected him. You're the one who gave it to me in the first place. Everything I am now, everything we've built together, began the day you valued me enough to set me free. The shop, which Abigail named Liberty Dressmaking, quickly gained a reputation for quality work. She divided her time between the ranch and town, with Wyatt and the children often joining her in Albuquerque for extended stays. Their home remained the ranch, but the business gave Abigail a sense of accomplishment entirely her own. On the 10th anniversary of the day Wyatt had intervened in Silver Creek, they sat together on the porch of their expanded home. James and Elizabeth played in the yard with their youngest, 3-year-old William, while the sunset gilded the landscape in shades of amber and gold. Do you ever regret it? Abigail asked, her head resting on Wyatt's shoulder. Spending all that money to free a stranger. Wyatt's arm tightened around her. Best investment I ever made. He kissed the top of her head. Though you were never really a stranger. Something in me recognized you from the first moment, not your face, but your spirit. My spirit wasn't at its best that day, she reminded him with a smile. It was unbroken, he corrected. Bent, maybe, wounded certainly, but not broken. That's what I saw, a woman with the courage to endure without surrendering her essential self. Abigail looked out at their children, at the home they'd built, at the life that had seemed impossible a decade ago. From property to be traded to beloved wife, mother, and businesswoman, the transformation still sometimes left her breathless with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing my worth when I'd forgotten it myself. Wyatt turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. The years had added a few lines to his face, silver threads to his dark hair, but his eyes still held the same steadfast light that had given her hope on that desperate day long ago. I didn't give you worth, Abigail, he said softly. I just recognized what was always there. You did the rest yourself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the New Mexico sky in breathtaking hues, they sat together in the gathering twilight, two people who had found in each other not just love, but the rarest gift of all, the freedom to become their truest selves.